I've had a few folks ask me to go in a little bit more detail about my aquaponics system, so I figured I'd take the time to step through some of the features and highlights of what I've got put together. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more informative and helpful. So let me start off by saying that I am not an expert or an authority on aquaponics systems and all the other things that go along with it. I am an individual that found an interest in doing this. Just like you, I go and I look at videos and I observe how other folks are doing things and decided, well, I would like to try and come up with something that would work for me. And so I did. I started out with a small system. I wanted a prototype based on what I had learned and observed online. And I talked to my son, and both of us shared the interest in coming up with something. And so I put together a small unit, put it on my patio. I had some tomatoes and other plants. I think I initially started with like squash and, I'm sorry, not squash, but cucumbers and onions and basil and other things along that line. And it actually went very, very well. So I decided I would scale up and put together a greenhouse. Well, I looked online for a lot of plans for an aquaponic greenhouse setup. I found some things, but not necessarily what I had in mind. So I ended up designing my own deal. Figured out how to do things and the way I wanted it done and started building it and put it together. But this whole system really kind of starts right here. And what is right here is the fish. I'm using tilapia. I'm in a warmer climate. I'm in Florida. And the tilapia fish they enjoy the warm water. And for the most part, they do fairly well here. I would say over the winter, it got a little cool, and I had to try to figure out a way to heat up the water. And so, you know, we do encounter cold snaps here in Florida. So there are times when the temperature will dip down into the 50s and 40s, and sometimes even the 30s and upper 20s. So, you know, I've got probably 1,000 gallons of water or close to it running through my system, and it's fairly stable, but I do find that you still have to kind of warm it up and regulate it and under certain circumstances. I've had, some fish die on me. I don't know exactly if it was weather related or whatever, but anyway, so the fish live here, and I have a pump that is pumping the water from my sump tanks into the fish tanks. It overflows and it goes out that pipe there. And I will take you inside the greenhouse and I'll show you where that outflow begins inside the greenhouse. But I have two tanks. I am going to do a different design on these tanks to where I'm going to basically combine it into one. It's a little bit of a problem for me to have two tanks. I've got an automatic fish feeder, and I had a split that went between tank 1 and tank 2, and it kept getting clogged up. And so I'm just going to come up with a different design and take a little bit of a different approach. If I didn't mention it before, I will mention it again. I am not an expert, and so I do discover things through trial and error. I do find that that's the best way that I learn. It's okay to make a mistake, but you learn from it and you try to do it better. I am, let's say, I do try to anticipate as much as I can on the designs and the stuff that I do. Do the best I can, but yeah, hey, it's all part of the fun. So from the fish tanks, the pipe comes into the greenhouse here, and it flows down And each grow bed, I've got a total of 7 grow beds in here. And each grow bed has a pipe that will fill and flood the bed. So this is a flood and drain system. And after the pump pumps the water into the fish tanks and the overflow begins, from that point on, everything is gravity. So it takes the water fills up each of the bed, and at one point it will reach a point to where the bell siphon will kick in, and it will pull all the water out of the grow bed, and it flows down into my sump tanks. And I'll show you what the bell siphon looks like. The bell siphon will kick in at a certain point where the water, I'm about halfway filled up on this one, but it consists of an outer shroud that surrounds a standpipe, and I've got a wider mouth on that standpipe, so it kind of helps create more of the suction once the water level reaches the top of that. And the outer shroud obviously helps keep the gravel and everything else from getting inside that water chamber. So the bell itself just goes over that standpipe, and once it reaches a certain point, there's a curved end. I don't know if you can see it through the video, but you know, there's a curved end, and the suction is created, and it pulls all the water out of the grow bed. From there, it drains. I've got a drain pipe that is underneath the grow bed, and it flows all the way around, and it goes into one of my 2 sump tanks right here. And from that, I've got tank number 1 connected into tank number 2. So I've got a pipe in here that levels both of these out. And I found that the IBC totes do very well in this type of setting, and for the size of my greenhouse and grow bed and aquaponics system, it seems to do quite well. These are 2 275-gallon tanks, and they fluctuate in their level. But because both beds are connected, or I'm sorry, because both sump tanks are connected through a pipe in between them, they will level out. So as one receives the water from the grow beds, the other one here pulls it up and sends it up into the fish tanks. I ran electrical into the greenhouse, obviously, for connecting the pumps, and I've got lights in here, and so I've got another outlet right there, and I've got another one over there, and it seems to work quite well. But this is the only mechanical piece of this whole system, taking it from the tank, pushing it up to the from the sump tank up to the fish tanks. I find that some things grow extremely well in this environment, and there are other plants that do not maybe do quite as well. Obviously, tomatoes, I think, are pretty successful. I've grown cabbage, I've got Swiss chard, I've grown a number of peppers in here. All of those seem to do very well. What does not do well, because I do have it enclosed, are plants that need to be pollinated, like squash and cucumbers and things along that line. So that's why I have moved some of my stuff outside for handling or for growing in that type of an environment, so bees will come and they will pollinate and so on and so forth. But things that do not, that are self-pollinated, that do not depend on bees and other insects to pollinate them, I find do quite well in this environment. Now, some people have an open aquaponics system. I have just chosen to enclose mine, hopefully to try to minimize insects, but it doesn't always really work very well because they still find their way in. And I find that that's probably one of my biggest challenges on how to treat insects inside of an aquaponics system, because you can't just put anything and everything in here chemical wise, because you'll end up killing your fish. So there's a balance. that has to be in place. Plus, you also do not want to kill your good bacteria that lives inside, your grow media. I did choose to use 3/4 inch river rock for my media, and it seems to do very, very well. I've also, in my starter system, I used Hydroton, which is basically the clay media balls, this stuff here. That was very effective. This is very lightweight. But inside my greenhouse, I have a total of about 3.5 tons of rock. No, I've got more than that. Each bed is about 2,000 pounds, so I've got 7 tons of rock inside this greenhouse. The beds themselves are about 2 feet deep, and as you can see, I have them filled up pretty much to the top. But I built the structure fairly solid and fairly strong, and I've had no issues with it being able to handle the weight, not only of the rock but the water, because water is going to add a lot more weight to it. So this handles quite a bit of weight in here. The great thing about an aquaponics system is that you have many options that you can go with as far as your types of growing platforms, and there are some that use media-based growing. This is my up-and-coming floating raft system. I will continue to work on getting this thing built out. I've got a flow challenge of the water coming in and the water going out, so I've got to do some settings with that. But the idea is that I'm going to end up growing lettuce out of these little neti pots that will go in styrofoam that will float on the top of this. I've got aeration pumped in here, and so the water is going to come from the sump tank, and this is where this line is coming out. It's actually, you can't really see it from here, I can't get back there, but it's the same line that's coming from the sump tank, and it flows into here, and then my outflow will be there, which is piped in to go into my dump tank to catch and collect all the water that's outflowing from the system. And floating raft is probably not as effective as far as space to grow ratio. I think you're a lot more successful with more vertical, and that's kind of why I've got the overhead trellises, is that I've got limited space on the grow bed side, so the best way to handle the overgrowth is up. And I think with this, I'm mainly going to use it, like I said, for lettuces and stuff like that. But I think grow towers is a better use of space. You have a lot more area to grow. You have more biomass to where your good bacteria and everything else will grow on. That it just seems like that you can get a lot more vertically than you can horizontally. But this is what I have. I'm going to use this for now, and I will come up with different methods of growing and ways to improve and just try things differently. I am going to do something a little bit different with my strawberries, and probably put it in some sort of a gutter, and put Hydroton in there and channel water through there and let it, and see what happens. This is the back side of my greenhouse, and inside there is where I have my floating raft system. I've got a shade overhead, and I've got polycarbonate panels up top to prevent rain from flooding my floating raft system, and I just didn't want to overwhelm my system with we do get strong rains in Florida, especially during the summertime, so I felt that this was a good way to prevent it from flooding my system with too much water. And behind door number 2 is my fish. So I wanted to go with a little bit more of an aesthetic appeal to the system, and not just not have it in the middle of my yard where it just looked crammed or anything like that. So it's kind of why I went with this design. Anyway, that is the aquaponics system, and I will hopefully post more information later. And as I encounter challenges and issues and obstacles and whatever, I hope to talk a little bit more about it and maybe get some feedback on pointers that other people have experience in overcoming. All right, that's it. Bye.